Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Monday afternoon webinar series from Corwin, your no-cost platform for superior professional learning. Today's presentation is Beyond Transformation, Transcending the Status Quo with the T3 Framework, with your presenter, Dr. Sonny Magana. Now what I'd like to do is turn the meeting over to Ariel Curry, Acquisition Editor for Corwin, to introduce today's presenter.
Hi, everyone. It is my honor to introduce my friend and author, Dr. Sonny Magana. Sonny is a best-selling author and education technology pioneer. He's worked extensively with Dr. Robert Marzano throughout the years and was the principal of Washington State's first cyber school, which is pretty cool. He also just returned from Nigeria, where he was doing some work and consulting on the T3 framework, which you're about to learn about. What you might not know is that Sonny is also a very talented musician. He is a yoga practitioner and erstwhile mountaineer, which is where we got the inspiration for the beautiful cover of his new book with Corwin called Disruptive Classroom Technologies. So I know Sonny is going to tell you all about that, and we're just so thrilled that he's presenting here today. So Sonny, please take it away.
And this is thank you very much, Ariel. It's a pleasure truly to be here. So this is an interesting Monday afternoon webinar on a Thursday. So this is an extra special Monday webinar. My name is Sonny Magana, and I'm delighted to share this work, this Disruptive Classroom Technologies, and how we can go beyond thinking about transformation in education, because I think we need to set our sights a little bit higher than transformation. First of all, there's no real common definition of what we mean by transformation in education. So in the course of my remarks today, I'd like to offer what I hope can be a common collective definition of what we mean by transformation with digital tools in education. And there are three things that I'd like to have you all think about and take away from this webinar. And the first is that we need more precision in our understanding of how we use technology, more precision in the way we talk about how we use technology, and perhaps most importantly, more precision in the way we measure the impact of instructional strategies that are enhanced with technology. So really the first learning intention for this webinar is that you will be able to understand and represent a new and more precise framework, a language, a model of technology integration to communicate and implement and measure the impact of transformational and transcendent teaching and learning with technology. The second thing I'd like to be able to think about is accessing a whole host of resources for assessing the current technology use in your school or school system, and then help the entire system, but individual teachers, coaches, leaders, even students, establish meaningful goals and then monitor and track their progress towards those goals. Because in the collective, what you'll be able to do is guide your entire learning system to move forward and build collective efficacy in ways that we can go beyond the normal expectations and limitations for which public education was designed. So take a moment and just reflect on these three goals, these three learning intentions. Ask questions to yourself. What do you really want to learn about this? What are going to be your takeaways? Okay, I spend time with this because it's really important to consider what is the learning intention of any experience, and this is a professional learning experience for you. Look, we've been for too long beholden to evidence-free propaganda when it comes to technologies in education, and so we have to look at the research. And in order to do that, we have to wrap our minds around one of the most meaningful ways of assessing what has a positive impact on student learning. And so Professor John Hattie's work on effect size really helps frame our understanding of instructional practices or any intervention that has a positive impact on student achievement. It's a statistical measure. Some of you may be familiar with this book, Visible Learning. If not, I strongly suggest you get it. It is a compendium of the most highly reliable strategies that are ranked according to effect size. So effect size, you can think of it as an odometer, a meter of interventions that have a positive impact to those that don't. So in Hattie's work in Visible Learning, at 160 interventions, and the average effect of them was 0.4 on this scale from 0 to 1. So that's the average effect. Anything above that could be considered highly desirable. Anything below that, not so much. And we have to be aware of the reliability factor of these interventions. When it comes to technology, if we keep this odometer in mind from negative impact, low impact, medium to high, then that gives us a lens through which we can better consider interventions that we want to establish in our school systems. We've been using technology arguably for 50 years in education, and this is very recent research by Professor Hattie. He did a meta-analysis of over 10,000 studies, from 10,000 studies rather, and he found that the average effect of technology on student achievement is 0.34. And what's worse is that this effect hasn't changed over 50 years, despite tremendous changes in technology. So think of the educational technologies that were available in the 1960s and 70s to now. Even then, if we look at the average impact of all that technology, the impact is 0.34. So let's look at that on the scale. It is well below the zone of desired effects. So the preponderance of evidence really indicates that the impact of educational tools on student achievement, despite billions of dollars in investments in these tools, infrastructure, internet access, teacher training, the impact is highly undesirable, and it hasn't changed in half a century. This has been a wicked problem that matters to me for over 30 years. I first began looking at the impact of technology in education in 1984, and I was doing a study at Rutgers University where I was a graduate student. The technology that we had was an Apple IIe computer and a software program called the Oregon Trail. Some of you may be smiling to yourselves, like, you remember the Oregon Trail, you remember Apple IIes. The interaction was really kind of hitting the space bar and moving forward in this sort of arcade-like game. And my first research study back in 1984 was to study the effect of that learning tool on student engagement. What we found was that student engagement was very high at first because the novelty of the experience, and then it dipped pretty quickly. We've been following that same roller coaster effect for 50 years, where new technology is introduced, student engagement is high, but that bump in student engagement is based on the novelty of the tool. So it's artificial, and it always comes back down. So we've been on this sort of novelty conveyor belt in education for a long time, and that's a problem. It's a wicked problem that matters to me. Another wicked problem that mattered to me when I was 14 years old was learning how to play guitar. As Ariel very graciously mentioned, I'm a musician, and I started playing guitar when I was 14 years old because that was a wicked problem in me. I wanted to figure this out. I wanted to play like the Beatles played. And so what I did is I listened to songs on the radio and just transposed them onto my acoustic guitar. If there was ever a campfire and folks around the campfire, I was usually the guy strumming the guitar and playing songs that I heard on the radio, which was great. I just kept playing the songs that I knew, though. So I wasn't getting much better as a musician. I just kept playing the same songs over and over. And then I heard Eddie Van Halen play. The 90-second solo interruption totally disrupted my life. It completely changed how I thought about music and my musicianship. And I thought, I just can't go back to playing, Peaceful Easy Feeling or Country Roads. It's not that they're bad songs. They're great songs. But there was a whole new world that I wanted to start to explore. It just happened that I heard Eddie Van Halen on a radio interview in the Philadelphia radio station that I listened to as a kid, and the DJ said, "Eddie, do you have any advice for young guitarists who want to get better and play in rock bands?" And Eddie said, "Yes, I do." He said, "If you're the kind of kid that's playing the guitar, listening to the songs on the radio, strumming songs around the campfire, keep doing it, because that's necessary for a start. You've got to keep doing that. But if you want to get better, you got to go through another stage." And he said every great guitarist goes through what he calls the Chuck Berry stage, because Chuck Berry almost single-handedly invented rock and roll. If you really listen to all the great records that he produced in the 50s and 60s, he changed the meter, the rhythm, the sound of rhythm and blues and Delta blues and gospel, and he created this unique music that transformed all those other forms of music into rock and roll. And Eddie said, you got to learn to play all those licks. You got to transform what you're doing and play like Chuck Berry played. You got to go through that stage. Every great guitarist goes through the Chuck Berry stage in order to get to the stage where they're playing their own musical instrument. They've got their own voice, their own way of expressing themselves, and play in an innovative way that goes above and beyond anything they played before. So what Eddie did for me is he created a framework. Life is complex. There's a lot of variables in our worlds, and so we need to have something to help guide our movement forward. That's what frameworks do. Frameworks help guide our progress and gives us meaningful criteria by which we can gain feedback. And so what Eddie did is he created a guitar playing framework for me that helped me think about, was I just playing around the campfire? Was I just playing the same old songs? Was I playing something new like Chuck Berry? Or am I creating my own unique voice, finding my own innovation within me and expressing that? And that interview stayed with me for the rest of my life. And it was really the seed for this framework that I've developed, the T3 framework for innovation in education, as a way to help solve the wicked problem of low technology impact on teaching and learning. Now, there are three domains to this framework: translational technology use, transformational technology use, and transcendent technology use. I'll go through each of these in more detail, but I just wanted you to look at the overall framework. The T3 stands for those three big domains: translational, transformational, and transcendent. Within each domain, there are elements. Under translational technology use, I've defined the two substages as automation and consumption. Under the transformational domain, I've defined two sub-elements called production and contribution. And in the highest value of technology use, what I call transcendent technology use, the two subdomains are inquiry design and social entrepreneurship. So let me take a moment and dive into each one of these and share my thinking as to why I framed it this way, why I use those terms. And this I hope will be a common language that we can use to determine impact of technology ascending from low to high to very high. So frameworks, as I mentioned, help. And there have been a couple of frameworks that I need to talk about. The TPAC framework was exceedingly useful in 1998 when it first came out. Professors Mishra and Kohler introduced this Venn diagram to demonstrate that in a modern learning context, technological knowledge is equally as important as pedagogical knowledge or content knowledge. And I agree wholeheartedly. This is a research-based framework that Professors Kohler and Mishra put forth to help us think about moving to this intersection, the very center point where teachers are building sufficient technological knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, and content knowledge in order to meet the needs of students that were about to enter the 21st century. The challenge with TPAC is that it provides really laudable goals, very helpful things for us to consider, but no real pathways to get there. How do you build technological knowledge? How do you know you're gaining growth with technological knowledge? And what sort of measures and feedback can we have to assess our growth? That's a shortcoming in the TPAC model. And it's something that really kind of troubled me. There's another model that made its way into education called the SAMR model. There's some challenges to the SAMR model. The first is that it's not research-based. It's really, we can't put this in the same category as the TPAC model because the SAMR is not research-based. It's also very tool-centric. So when you think about the terms, substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition, they really refer to the technology use. So this isn't a teacher-centered framework. It's not a student-centered framework. It's a technology-centered framework. And that is a limitation. What's a good thing about the SAMR model is that it shows incremental growth. Like there is a pathway towards improved technology use. However, that pathway offers goals, but again, no real pathway to achieve those goals. Another trouble with the SAMR model is that it's really hard to come up with a collective definition of what we mean by modification. What do we mean by redefinition? What do we mean by augmentation? So I'm working with a lot of school systems that are spending an inordinate amount of time trying to define these terms. And many school districts have taken this idea and added a framework on top of framework. And that is troublesome because a framework should help you make sense of complex phenomena like technology and education. To have to build a framework to make sense of a framework speaks to the usefulness of the original framework. So if people are spending so much time trying to figure out how to implement this because they want to demonstrate growth in technology, they want to have an impact, but if they can't define it, they can't observe it. If you can't really have a common definition of what we mean by redefinition, you won't be able to observe it. If you can't observe it, then you won't be able to measure it. And that's a significant shortcoming in the SAMR model. As a result, the needle's been stuck at 0.34 effect size for technology and education. And I think we need to get unstuck. And that's really why I built this T3 framework, to build upon the past rather than rely upon it. So these ideas, these concepts are incremental, they're highly research-based, grounded in theoretical background knowledge, the extant literature, and compounding evidence on how to use technology to really unleash students' limitless passion for learning. So let's dive into the first level, translational technology use. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's look at the etymology of the word translation. It comes from the Latin word translare, which means to ferry across or to express something in a different language or different modality. So quite literally, when you're using technology in a translational way, you are just changing the modality from an analog mode to a digital mode. That what you're doing isn't significantly changed, neither is the person doing the task significantly changed. So instead of having kids do a poster, now they can do a Google slide presentation. That doesn't substantially change the task. There's value to that. There is value to this kind of technologies, but it's limited to just expediency, accuracy, and the saving time. And that's not trivial. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. But we can do better. So that's what I mean by translational technology use. It's just the kind of technology use that does in a digital form what was done previously in an analog form. The two elements under translational technology use are, again, valuable, but of relatively limited value. The first is automation, where we just use technology to automate tasks and make the completion of those tasks easier, more effective, more accurate, so we save time. This is by far the predominant use of technology in education is for communication, testing, data storage, grading, all these administrative tasks. And it adds a layer of efficiency, which is good. Then there's another element, consumption. And that's when teachers and students consume media in a digital form, whereas once they consumed it in an analog form. So looking at wikis or blogs or digital videos as opposed to the analog version of those tools. You know, when you think about it, we're just now accessing information, and that adds value. It provides access to a host of information that wasn't previously available. But in terms of the value on student learning, it's relatively low. So This is akin to playing the same songs over and over on the guitar by a campfire. It's a good start, but we mustn't make the mistake of stopping there. We have to go further, and that's why we need some guidance and a pathway forward to help build that technological knowledge and pedagogical knowledge simultaneously. And that's an important point. To build technological and pedagogical knowledge simultaneously is a function of this T3 framework. So let's look at the second domain, transformational technology use, and the two elements, production and contribution. So you're probably wondering, what does he mean? what do I mean by transformational technology use? Why don't I tell you? This is a type of technology use that has substantive value to student learning. So the effect sizes of the strategies in the elements for transformational technology were observed by my friend and co-author, Dr. Robert Marzano, who very graciously wrote the foreword to this book, and many thanks to my friend Ariel for selecting this beautiful cover. So this is really significant, though. The effect size of the strategies is 1.6, which is equivalent to 3 or 4 additional years of academic achievement in a single year, perhaps more. I'm going to say that again. 1.6 effect size is like a child learning in 1 year what it would take 3 years to learn in the absence of these strategies. That's really significant, and it's something we all need to pay attention to and tell everybody. So that's what I'm doing. I'm telling everybody. Let's look at that scale. It's literally off Hattie's scale. It's crazy good effect size. 1.6 is a phenomenal effect size. Now, we must be cautious because as researchers, we would be remiss if we said, if you do these strategies, you'll get 1.6 effect size every time, every classroom, every situation. It doesn't work that way. The way it works is that these are high probability strategies. See, there's no such thing as a high yield strategy. There are only high probability strategies. And so when the strategies that I'm about to show you are implemented with reasonable accuracy, reasonable confidence, reasonable fidelity, one can expect significant gains in student learning. And that's supported by compounding evidence. So let's look at that. This is what I mean by transformation. The origin of the word is from Latin, which means to substantively change in appearance or shape or form. I think what we've been doing, though, is focusing on the form and not the substance when it comes to technology use in education. We've been changing the outward appearance of what we do, but the substance hasn't been dramatically altered or enhanced. So I'd like to offer a definition for transformational technology use. And it's the type of tech use that really substantively changes both the learning task itself and the student who is performing that learning task. They're no longer the same kid after technology learning experience that is transformational. And here's why. They've got a higher level of consciousness. They have a higher level of knowledge or cognizance, so they no longer see the same problems in the same way. You know, Einstein said that you need a higher level of consciousness in order to solve problems than the level of consciousness that created the problem. I take that to mean when we solve problems and we deeply consolidate that knowledge, whether it's declarative or procedural knowledge, then that knowledge becomes a part of us, and we are no longer the same person. We no longer look at the same problems in the same way because we've solved them, and we've got a higher level of consciousness. So there are two elements to the transformational technology use, and the first I call production. Alvin Toffler in the 70s said that the age of digitization in the human history is going to give rise to a new type of person, a prosumer, someone that produces just as much knowledge and information as they consume, perhaps more. So he presaged the internet age, where now we have the ability for students to produce representations of their knowledge. The declarative knowledge, which is what they know, the procedural knowledge they've consolidated, which is what they can do, strategies and skills and how they do it. And they can use digital tools to create representations of what I call digital thought artifacts, knowledge and thought artifacts that represent student thought pathways, the pathways that they followed in order to create those artifacts. That's really significant because as an educator and evaluator of student learning, it's far more important for me to know the thought pathways that students follow in order to arrive at some decision or answer or solution. Because if I can see or explicitly know their thinking, then I can identify misconceptions. And that's the first step to clarifying misconceptions and rectifying them. So this is really significant. So there are three strategies that I've put into the production. The first is students produce personal mastery goals. There's a lot of research supporting the idea of students owning their own assessment. There's a lot of people that ask, who owns the learning? Who owns the learning? I've got a different question. Who owns the assessment? Is it owned by the teacher? Is it owned by the testing company? Is it owned by school? Is it owned by a consortium? If you know who owns the assessment, that's who owns the learning. And getting students to own their learning is a function of these three strategies, where students produce mastery goals so they can track their proximity to their learning intentions with more clarity, with more precision, with strategy, and in a way that's measurable. That's really significant because it provides a richer quality and also quantity of learning feedback, not from the teacher to the student, but from the student to the teacher, from the student to him or herself, and to his or her classmates. The second strategy is for students to constantly track, monitor, and visualize their growth and mastery. So having students track their effort, their progress, and even how they feel about their effort and their progress. Tracking their effort, progress, and affect is a really powerful way for students to become more self-regulatory when they're working at the surface level of knowledge, the deeper level of knowledge, or transferring that knowledge into some new context or solving some wicked problem that matters to them. The third strategy is for students to produce and archive these authentic knowledge and thought artifacts so that they represent for themselves and for their teachers what they know, what they can do, and how they think about it. There's a whole host of tools that can be used from the Google suite of tools, the Microsoft Office 365 suite of tools, and a range of screencasting tools, and many other open-ended productivity tools that are freely available or readily available for students to use, not just to consume information that somebody else is creating, but to produce their own. Screencastify, Screencast-O-Matic, Jing, ScreenChomp. These are all really powerful ways for students to sort of think on the fly and capture their speculative thoughts in a digital thought artifact. We can go a step further, and this is production. Production is the level of higher level and transformational scale, because now we can give students the opportunity to contribute to their learning environment. And the first element is for kids to co-create and contribute and even track their observance of classroom promises and commitments. So we give kids rules and expectations all the time, but that's an external thing. Really, if you think about it, we really enjoy creating the expectations and the norms by which we organize ourselves in collective communities. Helping kids become co-developers in a set of promises and commitments for their classroom helps them recognize that their input matters to the learning community. And I like promises and commitments because it comes from within. The child makes the promise and the commitment to uphold these conditions or attributes of highly effective learning environments that are contributive. And that's the start. So I suggest that every teacher in the beginning of the year has kids use digital tools to create classroom promises and commitments, share them, use them all the time, and have kids track their observance to these promises and commitments. The second stage, or the second strategy, is for students to produce tutorials. You know, the knowledge artifacts that I mentioned in production? Now have kids produce them in such a way, though, that they are designed to teach someone else what they now know. That changes the role of the student from simple consumer and student, really, to that of a teacher. They, in effect, become their own teachers. And when they start to design learning products that teach others what they know, they become resource designers. They become instructional designers, thinking about how somebody else's misconceptions might trip another student up. And so how can they help their classmates learn better based on what they know? That's a powerful transformational effect. It changes the role of the student and clearly enhances their level of cognizance, consciousness, and knowledge. But then, students need to capture these things. So if they capture these authentic learning tutorials, they can, over time, engage in the so important process of cumulative review, not just of their grades, but cumulative review of their thinking. So stop for a moment and imagine this. We now live in a time where students can capture authentic digital thought artifacts over the course of their academic career and engage in cumulative reviews of their thinking progressions throughout the entire course of their K-20 career. That is remarkable. It is remarkable because over time, students can see how their knowledge and cognizance has grown and progressed. If you're like me, I kept a scrapbook. I kept a ratty old shoebox with all kinds of stuff in there, all my things that I was keeping as part of my learning, and that just degraded over time. I couldn't access it. But now students can create digital museums to kind of curate their authentic learning tutorials and engage in that process of mindfully reflecting on their growth. That's highly motivating. It's highly motivating. It provides another form of rich feedback for the learners. So those are the two stages of what I call transformational technologies. And again, the strategies that underpin each of these points has been observed to have a very high effect size, 1.6. But I think we can go beyond that. I think we need to reconsider fundamentally the purposes for which organized educational systems were designed to serve. We now live not just in the 21st century, but we're in the start of the third millennium, and really the third great period of disruption for human history. The first was arguably when Gutenberg created his printing press. Human knowledge and thought grew tremendously and doubled. The amount of time it took for the sum total of human knowledge to double was shortened significantly. We had another disruptive period in the industrial age with the Industrial Revolution, where, again, there's a tremendous growth in human knowledge and representations of that knowledge. We're now in the really infancy stages of the digital disruptive period. And we need to think long term. We really need to take a long view of education in order to consider what are the elements or the attributes or the mindsets, the skills, the habits that students need in order to successfully address future learning problems. And I got to take a crack at it. I had to think, what would that look like? Even though I know I'm going to fail better, in the words of Samuel Beckett, we need to take a long view. And I think I'm going to harken back to Karl Popper's famous science philosopher, who said that science is the only way for us to understand nature. It's the only way we can understand relationships between variables. It's our only organon for understanding science, and we must subject our ideas to the refutation of science in order to hazard our prize. And we need to teach kids how to do that. So inquiry design and social entrepreneurship, I think, are representative elements of transcendent technology use. And again, looking at the Latin word transcendere, which means to go above and beyond the normal range of experience and expectations. I would even add limitations to that. We have to think well beyond the original purposes for organized educational systems in the digital age, the dawning of the digital age. I'm hearing the fifth dimension in the back of my mind right now. This is the dawning of the digital age. So what does that look like? Well, I'm going to hazard a definition. Transcendent technology use is the type of technology use that not only enacts substantive changes in the task itself and the person doing the task, but it also goes well above and beyond the normal range of expectations, experiences, and limitations for which public education was designed. And in this, we can now play in the space of helping students learn how they best learn by using the tools of the scientist, by generating an authentic line of inquiry to solve a wicked real-life problem that matters to them. And in doing so, students will also achieve a higher understanding, a higher level of consciousness. They become transformed, and they iteratively generate a more robust solution to that wicked real-life problem that matters to them. See, I think for the longest time, we've been asking our learners the wrong question. We ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? You want to be a doctor? You want to be a lawyer? You want to be a fireman? What do you want to be? And I think we have to recognize that that question is bankrupt. It just is bereft of value anymore, because the skills and the jobs and the tasks that our current students are going to aspire to in the next 15 or 20 years, not only have they not been invented yet, they haven't even been conceptualized yet. So instead of asking kids, what do you want to be when you grow up, we should ask two other questions. What wicked problem matters to you, and what are you going to do about it? What wicked problem matters to you, and what are you going to do about it? See, this unleashes students' passion, their purpose for learning, and helps them understand that knowledge and learning is not an end to itself. It's not enough to get a 4.0 grade point average, or get your A, or satisfy the compliance of the course. That's not the game. The game is to apply your knowledge and your learning to a greater means, to make the world a better place. That is an arguable purpose for the future of education, is to help kids realize that they can make valuable and a contribution to new knowledge and improve their world by engaging in the step-by-step sequence of the scientific process to follow an original line of inquiry and solve a wicked real-life problem that matters to them. Now, inquiry design is not new. I mean, this is tools that have been refined since the dawn of man to follow a sequence for systematic observation of phenomena in order to better understand that, identify the problem, investigate that problem, and hypothesize solutions to that problem. Now, typically, one doesn't get told that now you're going to make a contribution, original contribution of knowledge, until one enters a master's program and does a master's thesis or a doctoral thesis. And then we tell them, you are now at the stage where you can create original knowledge and contribute that knowledge to mankind. That begs the question, why do we wait so long? Why do we wait so long? I've been working with students in elementary school that have made significant contributions to real-life problems that matter to them in their classroom community, in their local community, their extended community, and their global interdependent community. That's how we help kids act locally and think globally, and use different technology tools to enhance the inquiry process, to identify problems that exist, build consensus to those problems, and then brainstorm and imagine robust solutions to those problems in an iterative fashion. Then communicate their knowledge. What do they learn? And how does their contribution add value? So the three strategies under inquiry design are to have kids investigate a wicked real-life problem that matters to them, like technology integration in education. That's a wicked problem. That's a really interesting term, by the way. Wicked problem was first introduced into the literature by Rittel and Weber in 1973. And they defined a wicked problem as a problem that is ill-structured, it's undefined, it's highly complex, multifaceted, intractable, and as yet unresolved. And we give kids problems all the time. That's one of our go-to strategies in education. We give them problems. But those problems are generally well-defined. They're well-structured. They're neat. They have a single answer. And while it's important to give kids opportunities to solve those types of problems, I think it's equally, if not more important, to give kids an opportunity to identify, investigate, and imagine solutions to wicked real-life problems that are intractable and as yet unresolved. That's how they learn rigorous cognitive skills. And to quote from Hattie, that's how kids can engage in the all-important knowledge transfer stage, where they're generating and testing hypotheses on the fly and using their knowledge to solve a problem in a completely different context than that in which they learned. So have kids then generate those resolutions and iteratively contribute their unique knowledge. Now, that's the penultimate stage in Transcendent Technology Use. The ultimate stage is what I call social entrepreneurship. And this is when we allow kids to imagine and engage in the design process to create new digital tools, new digital platforms, new apps, new digital resources as a means to solve those wicked problems that matter to them. There's a whole host of free platform building tools, environments, app building tools, software coding environments and tools to let kids represent their knowledge and represent their identification of problems and their resolutions to those problems in a digital form. This is where innovation really needs to be seeded in our schools, not just in computer labs, but every teacher should embrace students' use of digital tools to represent unique knowledge and unique solutions to problems in different content areas. It doesn't mean that every teacher has to learn how to code. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we need to open up our umbrella of our understanding of assessment and include student representations that are digital apps or representations of their understanding of software code to express their knowledge in new, unique, and novel ways rather than just limiting them to a small segment of what we mean by assessment. And then have kids beta test and iterate their robust solution so that they can continually refine it. I think it's really important for students to recognize that innovation is as much a function of imagination as it is iteration. They need to iteratively build upon an existing solution and constantly refine it, constantly improve upon it, constantly provide feedback. And in my book, I give a very sequential process for steps, really, for students to do this. One of the things that's really remarkable is the global goals, the sustainable goals for development, or sustainable development goals, rather. There are 17 domains of problems from ending poverty to life below water, life on the land, ending hunger. These are really powerful domains of wicked real-life problems that exist right now. So there's no shortage of wicked real-life problems, unfortunately. But that is a provocation and an invitation for students to find what matters to them and unlock their passion for making a valuable contribution to making the world a better place using the inquiry design process and using digital tools to generate not just value, but social value. And that's the essence of social entrepreneurship, doing good, making the world a better place while simultaneously creating value. That is a sustainable idea, and it's an idea whose time has come. Victor Hugo once said that there's nothing that can stop an idea whose time has come. And I think social entrepreneurship is an idea whose time has come. We need to embrace this and let our kids recognize that they can make a contribution to a wicked problem that matters to them by applying their knowledge as a means to an end, not as an end unto itself. So that, in a nutshell, is the overall preview of the T3 framework for innovation in education. Because it's more precise and because I have very specific targeted language and scales, what I call the Magana mastery scale, it can help us as individual teachers first assess the here and now. What is our current technology use? You might take a moment now and consider, in your classroom or in your school, how do you see technology being used? For automation, consumption, or for inquiry design? Are kids producing knowledge artifacts? Are they producing digital tutorials to teach other kids what they know and can do? Or are they just consuming digital tutorials? See, that really is an important step in building a better future, is understanding the here and now. When you have a really clear, quantifiable conception, model of the here and now, which is, look, we've got to realize it's impossible to create models that are completely accurate because there are just so many variables. George Bach said that all models are false, but some are useful. And that's just wickedly brilliant, because all models are false. Life is too complex. There are too many variables. Whenever you add humans into a setting, you're just going to confound the complexity of the experience, because there are just so many perceptions and the problem of meaning. However, some models can be useful because they can give us a measurable criterion by which we can assess movement and progress. So I would humbly submit that the T3 framework is a useful model because it can help us identify the here and now, and then set meaningful goals for continued growth towards mastery. And using the mastery scale, you can just quantify using a 3, 2, or 1, high, medium, or low, and indicators for each. Am I at a 1 with production, which is I'm just beginning, I'm making some mistakes, and I'm not really looking at the impact, and I've got some errors or oversights, or I'm at a 3. Am I mastering? So the scale is beginning, developing, and mastering. And I use the infinitive form because there's no proverbial mountaintop. We're constantly developing. If we achieve mastering, we'll never stop mastering. It's a process, not a place. However, if we're just beginning, we need to set a measurable goal and say, well, I want to be at developing with the elements in production by the end of the school year. And that means that I'm going to agilely and more adaptively apply technologies in a production process to have kids produce knowledge products and tutorials. Or if I'm mastering, then not only am I using the technology tools, my students using it with agility, I'm also adapting it to certain needs of students, whether they're elementary or younger primary grade students, or special needs students, or English language learners. I'm going to be adapting the technologies to meet the specific need of the student. And I'm also going to be mindful of the impact. John Hattie says, know thy impact. So impact mindfulness is a hallmark of mastering these different elements and strategies within the T3 framework. Now that means that if we're moving individually towards some higher output and impact with technology, we can also do so collectively at not just the classroom, but the whole school, or the whole school district, or the entire school system. The T3 framework is wonderfully scalable at all levels of our organizational educational systems to help move the whole entire organization forward. So there's a lot of systems thinking that was built into this, from Kurt Lewin to Peter Senge and all these wonderful systems thinkers, because I think we need to just recognize that, look, we've been doing professional development on technology for 40 years, and it just hasn't amounted to much. It just really hasn't. We need to rethink our conception of professional development and instead embrace what I call organizational development to help a whole system move forward and build collective efficacy. That's John Hattie's recent idea. Collective efficacy is when everybody in a system is moving forward with the belief that their improvements in their instructional capacity, their pedagogical knowledge, and their content knowledge will improve student learning in the entirety, holistically. I think the first step to building collective efficacy with technology is to provide a common language, a common model by which we can ascertain the here and now, set meaningful goals incrementally, monitor and track progress towards those goals, and repeat. So speaking of Hattie, he had some very nice things to say about my book. My book was peer-reviewed by Professor Hattie and many others, so I'll just stop talking for a moment and let you read through this. Also, this webinar is going to be recorded, so if you want to go back and take a look at these reviews, you can. But the key things, he said, it's really about changing classroom conversations from monologues to dialogues. And that's really an essence of my work and the strategies here. And that's how we'll really see technology make a difference. But we're not done. I mean, even though we have an effect size of 1.6, I'm engaging in ongoing research, ongoing systems research with schools. As Ariel graciously mentioned, I was just in Nigeria and also in Nairobi, Kenya, where school systems across Africa are now adopting the T3 framework as their innovation framework. And that is great fodder for action research to continue to subject these ideas to the refutation of science. My friend and mentor, Robert Marzano, for whom I'm very grateful, said nice things about the work, in particular the idea of making the future vision of technology more attainable and more inspirational. I'm very grateful to Bob. Michael Fullen also said very nice things about the framework and about this book, as did Al, my friend Alan November. Very, very kindly reviewed the book and said, this is what we should be doing. We should be moving towards Transcendent Technologies. And the great Yang Zhao very graciously reviewed the book and had very nice things to say. So you can go through and review these on their own. But look, we're on to something. This isn't the end all. But I think we're now on to something. I have a clear direction of where we can go with schools to unleash students' passion and purpose for limitless learning by using our existing technology tools better. It doesn't mean we need new tools. Let's better use what we've got. It's very much like moving from playing the guitar around a campfire to learning to play like Chuck Berry, and that's the transformational stage. We have to go through that stage. Every great teacher has to go through a stage where they're fundamentally transforming themselves and what happens to their classrooms and their students. You got to get through that stage to get to the next stage where you're teaching like Eddie's playing and you're just rocking out on the innovation framework. So to keep with that rock and roll theme, are you experienced? Are you experienced with the T3 framework? Send me a tweet or send me an email message. Use the hashtag T3 framework as a tag for this work, and let's have a discussion. And speaking of discussion, I think it's about time to see if we have any questions from Jeff. So I'll pause there and turn it over to you, Jeff. Do we have any questions from the group?
Yes, one question is, can you provide an example of student-developed classroom promises and commitments?
Yeah, I'm working with a lot of schools that kids create their promises and commitments, first by identifying the attributes of what is an effective learning environment for them. What are the characteristics that they need to learn best? And when you ask kids that question, what are the conditions that will help you learn best? They'll tell you. And they come up with great examples. Often it's about respect. It's about listening to others. It's about being careful with each other's feelings and thoughts, sharing. And what you can do is, depending on the grades of the students, have them work in small groups, in pairs, or in large groups to help give you brainstormed examples of those attributes. And then with your guidance as a teacher, have them come to consensus, have them vote on the attributes that are the most meaningful, the ones that are the highest priority, craft them into a promise and a commitment, which means that we promise to our commitment to the classroom is this. And then as a teacher, you do the same thing. I commit to being here every day. I commit to giving you my best effort every day. I'll be present for you every day. And then as a result, students are more likely to adhere to those norms for the class. So, and there's examples in the book and the website and continuing work on actual artifacts that classrooms are developing and putting on their walls. Kids are signing them, and their behavior issues have been reduced dramatically as a result of students contributing to the expectations for behavior in a classroom. So thank you for that question.
Great. I have another question.
Okay.
Are there case studies available that provide examples of transcendent tech use?
Yes. In the book, I give some examples of students that were using technologies to solve wicked problems that mattered to them. And this is still also very new. So I realize that in the work that I'm doing with schools to provide an avenue to develop transcendent technology use, we're developing a cadre, or really a collection of exemplars. And there are some that exist, but this is still a very new idea. So I'll give you one example from the book. There was a student that was in 8th grade, and problem for her, she was shy and was a victim of bullying in her school. So she ate lunch by herself. So she had some coding skills and developed an app called Lunch Buddies. The wicked problem that mattered to her was the pain of isolation in junior high. So she created an app called Lunch Buddies so that other kids could find kids to sit with and have lunch together in the classroom using GPS and social media. They're connecting with each other. It's now a robust solution. She's continuing to iterate it and develop it. But it's that kind of thinking that will provide kids with opportunities to really make a significant contribution. There's a lot of possibilities, but more concrete examples are forthcoming and will be helpful to wrap our minds around what it looks like. But it's still very new. The book just came out in June, so the idea of having kids using digital tools and app building resources, not just to play games or to tinker with things, but to actually create resolutions to wicked problems, is a novel idea. But it's one that's worth sharing. So I expect more examples and exemplars to help guide your thinking concretely to be forthcoming in short order.
And I have one last question. It's a little bit longer, but just before this session, I was looking over an email where some of my colleagues were getting overwhelmed about taking an online course with me. So I quickly made a screencast video of how I looked at the instructor's intro email and how I approached the online course. I think I was participating in T2, tracking my efforts and sharing with classmates. What do you think?
I think so too, and thank you for doing that. That's exactly what I want people to do, is to consider their technology use and where it fits in this continuum. Because it is a hierarchy, but it's also a continuum. And by that I mean sometimes it's absolutely appropriate and necessary to engage in translational technologies. That's fine. That's really important. Sometimes you'll be at the T2 level production, which sounds like what you did. You were tracking your progress, but you're also producing a representation of your understanding using screencast. So that fits squarely into T2 production. I'd need to have a conversation with you a bit more to suss out if you were at T 2.2, which is contribution. It sounds like you were, because you were providing some information and knowledge to your cohort in regards to the online course. So it sounds like you were squarely within T2. It might have been contribution, but we would need a bit more conversation to suss that out. But you're doing exactly what I hope people do, and that's been my experience. When people see the TPAC framework, it makes immediate sense, and they start categorizing their technology use. That's how we'll move the needle forward. Collectively, that's how we'll unleash our limitless potential and move the needle that's been stuck on 0.34 for 50 years. So thank you for that comment. Thank you for that question.
Terrific, and that's the end of our questions.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me. I hope this has been useful, and it's been a pleasure. I look forward to hearing back from all of you.
Thank you so much, Sonny.
Oh, go ahead.
This is Margaret O'Connor with Corwin. That was a lot of great information. Just as a reminder, if you're interested in learning more about Sonny's T3 framework, his book, Disruptive Classroom Technologies, is available on Corwin.com. We will also be sending you an email with the PowerPoint slides and a recording of today's webinar. And thank you all so much for attending.